Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive with My Mind MashUps. And today, we're going to be talking about something really fascinating. It's a topic that has kind of captivated thinkers and dreamers for centuries. It's time travel.
Yeah, time travel. It's such a persistent theme in science fiction and just, human imagination in general.
It really is. And I think what's so interesting about it is that it really forces us to think about the nature of reality itself.
hmm
What is time? Is it a straight line? Is it a loop? Is it something else entirely?
And what's so interesting is that even if we could travel through time, what would the implications be? Would we be able to change the past? Would we be able to see the future? Would it even be safe to do so?
And those are all huge questions. And some of the stuff we're going to be talking about today might make you think twice about some of your own experiences. Like,
Yeah.
have you ever had that strange sensation of deja vu?
Yeah.
Where you feel like you've been in a certain situation before. Could that be a subtle echo from another timeline, brushing up against our own?
That's a really interesting thought. And the idea of alternate timelines and parallel universes is something that's been explored a lot in science fiction. But but what if there's some truth to it? What if time isn't just a straightforward arrow, but it's more like a tangled web of possibilities?
That's what we're going to be exploring in this deep dive. And we've looked at a lot of different sources for this one. We've got everything from the established science that suggests time travel might not just be pure fantasy,
Right.
to some really perplexing real-world stories that might just make you wonder if time slips are actually happening all around us, maybe more than we realize.
And that's one of the things that I find so fascinating about this topic is that there is some actual scientific basis for the idea of time travel, at least in one direction.
Yeah.
But then there's also these strange stories and accounts that make you question whether there's something more to it than just the science.
So in this deep dive, we're going to be unpacking all of that. We're going to be looking at the science. We're going to be looking at the stories. We're going to be looking at the cultural impact of time travel.
Right.
And we're going to be the philosophical implications of it all. What does it mean for our understanding of free will if we can travel through time? What does it mean for our understanding of cause and effect? What does it mean for our understanding of reality itself?
And even if time travel is never possible, I think just thinking about it can really expand our minds and make us see the world in a new way.
Yeah. So if you're ready to have your mind blown, then buckle up
Mm.
because we're about to go on a journey through time.
All right. So where should we start?
Well, I think the best place to start is with the science
Okay.
because, there is some actual scientific basis for the idea of time travel. And I think the best place to start with that is with Einstein's theory of relativity.
Yeah. Einstein's theory of relativity is really the foundation for our modern understanding of time and space. And it's really two theories. There's special relativity and general relativity.
Right. So maybe we can break those down a little bit.
Sure.
So special relativity, what is that all about?
Well, special relativity deals with the relationship between space and time and how they're affected by motion.
Yeah.
One of the key insights of special relativity is that time is not absolute.
Oh.
It's relative to the observer. So what that means is that time can actually pass at different rates for different observers depending on their relative motion.
So that means, like, if I'm standing still and you're moving really fast,
Right.
time is going to pass differently for me than it is for you.
Exactly. The faster you move, the slower time passes for you relative to someone who is standing still.
That is so bizarre.
It is. And this has actually been experimentally verified. They've taken atomic clocks,
Oh.
put them on airplanes and flown them around the world. And when they come back, the clocks that were on the airplanes are actually slightly behind the clocks that were left on the ground.
So it's not just a theory. It's actually been proven.
Right. And this is the basis for the idea of forward time travel.
So this is where we start getting into time travel.
Right. Because if you could travel fast enough, close to the speed of light, then time would pass so slowly for you relative to everyone else on Earth that you could essentially travel into the future.
I see.
So you could, go on a trip in a spaceship at close to the speed of light for, let's say, a year. And then when you came back to Earth, decades or even centuries could have passed,
Oh.
depending on how fast you were going.
So forward time travel is actually something that's scientifically plausible.
Right. It's not technologically feasible right now.
Yeah.
We don't have the means to travel at those speeds.
Right.
But the theory itself is sound.
Okay. So that's special relativity.
Right.
Now, what about general relativity? How does that play into this?
Well, general relativity is Einstein's theory of gravity. And and one of the key insights of general relativity is that gravity is not a force.
Okay.
It's a curvature of space-time.
A curvature of space-time.
So imagine like a bowling ball on a trampoline.
Okay, yeah.
The bowling ball curves the trampoline, and that's kind of what massive objects do to space-time. They curve it.
I see. So anything with mass warps the space around it.
Exactly. And this warping of space-time is what we experience as gravity.
Wow.
So the Earth is curving space-time around it, and that's why we're pulled towards the Earth.
I see. So that's why if I drop this pen, it falls to the ground
Exactly.
instead of floating up to the ceiling.
Right. And what's interesting about this is that this curvature of space-time also affects time.
Oh,
So the stronger the gravity, the slower time passes.
okay.
And this has also been experimentally verified. They've taken atomic clocks, placed them at different altitudes, and the clocks that are lower down, closer to the Earth, where gravity is stronger, actually run slightly slower than the clocks that are higher up.
So this is kind of like the opposite of the special relativity example, where if you're moving really fast,
Right.
time slows down.
Yeah.
Here, if you're in a strong gravitational field, time slows down.
Exactly. And this is actually taken into account in GPS satellites.
Really?
Because the clocks on GPS satellites are in a weaker gravitational field than clocks on the ground. So they have to be constantly adjusted so that they stay synchronized with clocks on Earth.
Wow.
So this is another example of how relativity affects our everyday lives.
Yeah, so forward time travel is scientifically plausible,
Right.
whether it's through traveling at near the speed of light
Right.
or through being in a really strong gravitational field.
Exactly.
But what about backwards time travel?
Yes. Backwards time travel. The holy grail of time travel enthusiasts.
Right? Because that's what we see in movies and TV shows. That's what really captures our imaginations.
Right.
But is that even scientifically possible?
Well, that's where things get a lot more complicated and a lot more speculative. General relativity does offer some theoretical frameworks that might allow for backward time travel.
Okay.
But these involve some very exotic and poorly understood aspects of space-time.
Like what?
Well, one possibility is something called a rotating black hole, or a Kerr black hole.
A Kerr black hole.
Yeah, so a black hole is a region of space-time where gravity is so strong that nothing, not even light, can escape.
Right.
And a rotating black hole is a black hole that is, well, rotating. And this rotation creates some very strange effects on space-time.
Such as?
Well, one of the effects is that it creates something called a closed time-like curve.
A closed time-like curve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a closed time-like curve is essentially a path through space-time that loops back on itself.
So you could travel along this path and end up back at a point in your own past.
In theory, yes, but there are a lot of problems with this idea.
Like what?
Well, for one thing, we don't know for sure if parablack holes even exist.
Oh.
We have some evidence to suggest that they do, but we've never actually observed one directly. And even if they do exist, we don't know if they're stable enough to allow for time travel.
I see.
And then there's also the issue of the paradoxes that could arise if backward time travel were possible.
Yeah, paradoxes, yeah.
Right, like the classic grandfather paradox.
Right, where you go back in time and kill your grandfather before your father is born.
Right, which means that you would never have been born.
So you wouldn't be able to go back in time and kill your grandfather.
Exactly.
It's a paradox.
It is. And there are other paradoxes as well, like the bootstrap paradox, where an object or information is created in the future, sent back in time, and then becomes the cause of its own creation.
So it exists without ever having been created.
Essentially, yes. And these paradoxes raise some serious questions about the logical consistency of backward time travel.
Okay, so black holes are out. What about wormholes?
Wormholes, yeah.
Yeah.
Wormholes are another theoretical possibility for time travel that comes from general relativity.
And what are wormholes exactly?
Well, a wormhole is essentially a shortcut through space-time.
Okay.
So imagine that you have a piece of paper and you fold it in half.
Right.
And then you poke a hole through the folded paper.
Okay.
That hole is a wormhole. It connects 2 points on the paper that would otherwise be far apart.
I see. So a wormhole is like a tunnel through space and time.
Right. And in theory, a wormhole could connect 2 different points in time, as well as 2 different points in space.
So you could travel through a wormhole and end up in the past or in the future.
In theory, yes. But again, there are a lot of problems with this idea.
Such as?
Well, for one thing, we don't know for sure if wormholes even exist.
Right.
General relativity allows for the possibility of wormholes, but it doesn't tell us how they would be created or if they would be stable enough to travel through.
And even if they did exist, wouldn't it take a huge amount of energy to create one?
It would. And it would also require a type of matter that we've never observed before called exotic matter.
It's exotic matter.
Yeah. Exotic matter is matter that has negative mass or negative energy density.
Okay, I'm officially lost.
It's got
Negative mass,
Yeah.
negative energy density. What does that even mean?
It's hard to explain without getting into the details of general relativity.
Yeah.
But basically, it means that this type of matter would have some very strange properties, like it would repel other matter instead of attracting it.
Okay, so this exotic matter is something that's purely theoretical.
Right. We've never observed it.
So even if wormholes do exist,
Yeah.
it's unlikely that we'll ever be able to use them for time travel.
That's the current thinking, yes.
Okay, so black holes are out, wormholes are out.
Right.
Are there any other scientific possibilities for backwards time travel?
Well, there's one more theory that I wanted to mention, and it's a bit of a mind bender.
Okay, hit me with it.
It's called the block universe theory or eternalism.
Block universe. Eternalism. Okay, those are some big words.
They are. But the theory itself is actually fairly simple.
Okay.
It's just the implications of the theory that are mind-bending.
Okay, so what does the block universe theory say?
Well, it says that the past, present, and future all exist simultaneously.
Whoa.
So imagine like a loaf of bread,
Okay.
and each slice of bread represents a different moment in time.
Okay.
And the whole loaf of bread represents the entire history of the universe from the beginning to the end.
I see.
So according to the block universe theory, all of those slices of bread, all of those moments in time already exist.
So the past isn't gone.
Right. It's still there, just like the future is already there. It's just that we're only experiencing one slice of bread at a time.
So we're like moving through this loaf of bread.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And from our perspective, it seems like time is flowing. But according to the block universe theory, time isn't really flowing. It's just that our consciousness is moving through this static block of space-time.
Whoa. So if the past, present, and future all exist simultaneously, does that mean that time travel is possible?
Well, that's a good question. And there's no easy answer. The block universe theory doesn't really tell us anything about how we could travel through time.
Okay.
It just tells us that all of time already exists.
I see.
So it's possible that there's some way to access those other moments in time,
Right.
but we don't know how.
So the block universe theory is more of a philosophical theory than a scientific one.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to put it.
But it's still a really interesting theory. Because it really makes you think about the nature of time in a different way.
It does. It really challenges our intuitive understanding of time as a flowing river.
Yeah.
And it suggests that maybe time is more like a vast ocean.
Okay, so we've looked at some of the scientific possibilities for time travel.
Mm.
But what about the real world? Are there any cases of people who have actually traveled through time?
Well, there have been a lot of claims of time travel over the years,
Wow.
but most of them have been debunked.
Yeah.
Or at least there's no good evidence to support them.
But there are a few cases that are still a bit of a mystery.
There are.
And I think one of the most famous ones is the case of John Titor.
John Titor, yes.
So for those who don't know, John Titor was an individual who appeared on online forums in the early 2000s claiming to be a time traveler from the year 2036.
Right. And he made a number of predictions about the future.
He did, some of which came true and some of which didn't.
Right.
But what was really intriguing about John Titor was the level of detail he provided about his time machine and about the future.
Yeah, he described his time machine in great detail.
He did.
He even posted pictures of it,
He did.
or at least pictures of what he claimed was his time machine.
Right. And he also talked about things like the political climate in 2036 and the technology that they had.
Yeah, and some of the things that he said were pretty out there.
They were
But some of them were also surprisingly accurate.
They were.
Yeah.
And that's what makes the John Titor case so fascinating, is that we don't know for sure if he was a real time traveler
Right.
or if he was just a really good hoaxer.
Yeah, it's a mystery.
But either way, it's a really interesting story.
It is, and it's one that people are still talking about today.
Okay, so John Titor's one famous case. What about another one?
Well, there's the Moberly Jourdain Incident.
The Moberly Jourdain Incident.
This one happened back in 1901.
Okay.
And it involves two women, Charlotte Ann Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain,
Right.
who are both academics at Oxford University.
Okay.
And they were visiting the Palace of Versailles in France.
Okay.
And they were walking through the gardens when they claimed to have experienced a time slip.
A time slip.
Yeah, they claim that they were suddenly transported back to the 18th century.
The 18th century.
Yes. And they described seeing people in period clothing
Really?
and hearing music that sounded like it was from that era.
So they actually like saw and heard things from the past.
That's what they claimed.
Wow.
And they even claimed to have seen a woman who they believed was Marie Antoinette.
Marie Antoinette.
Yeah.
The Queen of France.
Yes.
Wow. So what happened then?
Well, they eventually snapped out of it.
Snapped out of it.
Yeah, they suddenly found themselves back in the present day.
So it was like a dream?
Yeah, it's possible. Or maybe it was a hallucination.
Right.
Or maybe they just misremembered things.
Right.
But they were both very convinced that they had experienced a real-time slip.
And they wrote a book about it, right?
They did. They wrote a book called An Adventure.
Okay.
And in the book, they describe their experience in great detail.
And what do people think about their story?
Well, there's no consensus.
Right.
Some people believe that they really did experience a time slip.
Right.
Others believe that it was just a case of mistaken identity or a shared hallucination.
I see.
And there are also some people who believe that they were deliberately hoaxing people.
So it's another mystery.
It is, but it's a very intriguing one.
It is. Okay, so I've got John Titor. We've got the Moberly Jourdain Incident.
Right.
Are there any other cases that you wanted to mention?
Well, there's one more that I think is worth talking about.
Okay.
And it's the case of Rudolph Fentz.
Rudolph Fentz.
Yeah. Now, this one is a bit different because it's actually been debunked.
Oh, okay.
But it's still a really popular story.
Okay, so tell me about Rudolph Fentz.
So the story goes that Rudolph Fentz was a man who appeared in Times Square in New York City in 1950.
Okay.
And he was dressed in 19th century clothing.
19th century clothing.
Yes, he had a frock coat and a top hat and all that.
Wow.
And he was carrying some old currency and some business cards that had an address on them that didn't exist anymore.
Okay.
Yeah. And when the police questioned him, he was very confused and disoriented.
I imagine so.
And he said that he didn't know how he got there.
So it sounded like he had traveled through time.
It did. And the story became very popular. It was
Uh-huh.
published in newspapers and magazines all over the world.
Wow.
But then someone did some digging.
Oh.
And they discovered that the story was actually based on a short story that had been published in a science fiction magazine in 1951.
Oh, so it was just a fictional story.
It was, but it had been presented as a real event.
Wow. So people just took this fictional story and ran with it.
They did. And it's still circulating today.
Really?
Yeah, you can find it on websites and in books that claim to be about real time travel cases.
Wow, that's amazing.
It is. It just goes to show how powerful a good story can be.
It does.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are some of the most famous cases of alleged time travel.
Right?
But there's another phenomenon that I want to talk about that's often linked to time travel.
And what's that?
It's the Mandela Effect.
Ah, yes, the Mandela Effect.
So for those who don't know, the Mandela Effect is the phenomenon of large groups of people having the same false memories.
Right. Like remembering things that never actually happened.
Exactly. And it gets its name from the fact that many people have a false memory of Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s.
Yeah, when in reality he was released from prison in 1990 and lived until 2013.
Exactly.
And there are a lot of other examples of the Mandela Effect as well.
There are. Like the Berenstain Bears.
Yeah, a lot of people remember it being spelled Berenstain Bears.
Exactly. But it's always been Berenstain Bears.
Right.
And there's the Monopoly Man.
Yeah, a lot of people remember him having a monocle.
Right. But he doesn't.
He never has.
And there's the Kit Kat logo.
Yeah, some people remember it having a hyphen between kit and cat.
Right. But it's always been one word, Kit Kat.
It has.
So what's going on here? How can so many people have the same false memories?
Well, there are a few different theories. One theory is that it's just a case of confabulation.
Confabulation.
Yeah, confabulation is basically when our brains fill in gaps in our memories with made-up information.
Okay.
So if we can't remember something exactly, our brains just kind of make something up to fit.
I see. So maybe that's what's happening with the Mandela Effect. Maybe our brains are just filling in the gaps in our memories with these false memories.
It's possible.
Another theory is that it's a case of social contagion.
Social contagion.
Yeah, so the idea is that if we hear other people talking about a certain memory, we're more likely to start remembering it ourselves.
Right. And this is especially true if the memory is something that we want to believe.
So like if we want to believe that Nelson Mandela died in prison, we're more likely to start remembering it that way if we hear other people saying that they remember it that way too.
Exactly. And the internet and social media have made it much easier for these false memories to spread.
Right, because now we can connect with people all over the world who share our beliefs.
It's
And that can make those beliefs seem even more real.
right.
But there's another theory about the Mandela Effect that's a bit more out there.
And what's that?
It's the theory that the Mandela Effect is evidence of alternate realities or parallel universes.
Alternate realities, parallel universe.
Yeah, the idea is that there are many different universes that exist side by side,
Okay.
and that sometimes these universes can intersect or bleed into each other.
I see.
And so maybe the Mandela Effect is happening because we're catching glimpses of these other universes.
So like maybe in another universe, Nelson Mandela did die in prison in the 1980s.
Exactly.
And maybe some of us are remembering that reality.
Exactly.
Wow, that's a pretty wild theory.
And it is.
But it's not entirely implausible.
Right. Because there are some physicists who believe that the multiverse is a real possibility.
There are.
And if the multiverse is real, then it's possible that we could be experiencing bleed-through from other universes.
It's possible. But it's also important to remember that there's no scientific evidence to support this theory.
All right.
It's just a speculation.
But it's a very intriguing speculation.
It is.
And it's one that I think a lot of people find really fascinating.
I do too.
So that's the Mandela Effect.
Right.
A very strange and mysterious phenomenon.
It is.
And one that we're still trying to understand.
Right.
Okay, so we've talked about the science of time travel. We've talked about some real-world cases of alleged time travel. We've talked about the Mandela Effect.
Right.
But I think it's also important to talk about why we're so fascinated with time travel in the first place.
Yeah. Why does this idea capture our imagination so much?
Right.
Yeah.
What is it about time travel that's so appealing to us?
Well, I think there are a few different reasons.
Right.
One reason is that it allows us to escape from the present.
Right.
You know, if we're not happy with our lives or if we're just bored with the present, we can always fantasize about traveling to a different time. We can imagine going back in time and reliving our childhoods.
Right.
Or we can imagine going to the future and seeing what the world is like.
Right.
And that can be a very appealing thought,
It can.
especially if we're feeling stuck in the present.
Right. And I think another reason why we're so fascinated with time travel is that it allows us to explore the what ifs.
The what if.
Yeah, what if I had made a different decision?
Right.
What if I had taken a different path in life?
What if I had won the lottery?
Exactly. Yeah. Time travel allows us to explore those possibilities.
It does. And it can be a very cathartic experience.
It can. Because it allows us to imagine a different version of ourselves.
Right.
A version of ourselves who made different choices and who might be living a very different life.
And I think that's a very powerful thing.
It is.
Yeah.
And I think another reason why we're so fascinated with time travel is that it allows us to confront our own mortality.
Our own mortality.
We all know that we're going to die someday. But time travel allows us to imagine a world where death isn't the end.
Right. We can imagine traveling to the future and meeting our descendants.
Exactly. Or we can imagine going back in time and meeting our ancestors.
Right.
And that can be a very comforting thought.
It can. Because it suggests that even though our physical bodies will die someday, our essence or our spirit will live on in some way.
Yeah. So I think those are just some of the reasons why we're so fascinated with time travel.
Right. It's a very powerful idea.
It is. And it's one that's likely to continue to fascinate us for many years to come.
I think so too.
So there you have it. Our deep dive into the world of time travel.
Right.
We've looked at the science, we've looked at the stories,
Mm-hmm.
and we've looked at the psychology of why we're so fascinated with this idea.
And I think we've just scratched the surface.
We have. There's so much more to explore.
There is.
But hopefully this has given you a good introduction to the topic.
I hope so.
And maybe it's even made you think about time in a different way.
I think it has for me.
Me too. And who knows, maybe someday time travel will actually become a reality.
Maybe.
But until then, we can always dream.
We can.
And we can always explore these ideas in our imaginations.
Exactly.
So if you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to My Mind MashUps for more mind-blowing explorations of fascinating topics. You can find us on Amazon Music, Audible, Facebook, Pocket Casts, Spotify, and YouTube. Until next time, keep those minds mashing.
Yeah, keep thinking about the possibilities.
See you later.